My son's wife told me we only want important people at our wedding. I hung up the phone, said nothing, and made a few quiet calls. By sunrise, 12 vendor contracts were canceled, 4 credit cards were declined, and the $350,000 wedding had vanished into thin air. Before I tell you how I destroyed my own son's big day, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to remind someone who actually pays the bills. It was 8:30 on a Friday night in Denver. The old furnace in my 3-bedroom ranch house was rattling, fighting against the October mountain chill. I was standing at the ironing board in the kitchen, carefully pressing the steam button on a charcoal gray suit I'd bought at Joss, a bank back in 1995. It was a little tight around the shoulders now, and the fabric had that worn look that good wool gets after 27 years. But it was clean. It was respectful. It was the suit I'd worn to bury my wife Margaret 3 years ago, and it was the suit I intended to wear to walk my only son, Michael, down the aisle at the Broadmoor Resort. I'm Edward Patterson, 62 years old. To my neighbors, I'm just Ed, the retired logistics manager who drives a dented 2012 Chevrolet Silverado and spends too much time fishing in the mountains. They see me mowing my own lawn and fixing my own gutters. What they don't see, what nobody sees, is the bank account attached to the holding company I sold 4 years ago. When I exited the logistics game, I walked away with $85 million in liquid assets. I kept it quiet. I wanted a simple life. I wanted my son to love me, not for my checkbook. The money came from 39 years of backbreaking work. I started at Peterson Freight in 1981, loading trucks at 4 in the morning for $8 an hour. Margaret was pregnant with Mike then, and we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment above a pizza joint. I'd come home every night with my back screaming and my hands bleeding from the rough cardboard boxes. But I had a plan. I studied every route, every driver, every inefficiency in that company. I learned the business from the loading dock up. By 1985, I was a dispatcher. By 1990, I was route manager. By 1995, I'd saved enough to buy my first truck and start Patterson Logistics. Margaret kept the books from our kitchen table while Mike did his homework at the same table where we planned our empire. We were a team. We were building something together. The company grew slow and steady. No fancy investors, no venture capital, just good old-fashioned service and reliability. By 2010, I had 47 trucks, 120 employees, and contracts with every major retailer from Denver to Salt Lake City. When Walmart wanted to expand their Colorado distribution, they called me. When Home Depot needed emergency freight during the recession, they called me. I was the guy who got things done. Margaret always said I was too generous with the employees. I paid above union scale, gave full health care, and never laid anyone off during the slow seasons. She was probably right, but those drivers were like family. They'd trusted me with their livelihoods, and I wasn't going to let them down. That's how you build loyalty. That's how you build a legacy. When the big conglomerates started sniffing around in 2018, Margaret was already sick. Cancer had been eating at her for 2 years, and the medical bills were astronomical even with insurance. She told me to sell. "Take the money, Ed," she whispered from her hospital bed. "Give Mike a head start. Give yourself some peace." I sold Patterson Logistics to Transglobal Corp for $95 million in 2019. After taxes, fees, and paying off the medical debts, I walked away with $85 million. Margaret died 6 months later, never getting to see Mike use any of that money, because I never told him about it. I hung the suit on the kitchen cabinet knob and stepped back to admire it. Margaret had picked out this suit. She said charcoal gray made me look distinguished, not like the truck driver I'd been for so many years. She was always trying to polish me up, make me presentable for the country club events she dragged me to. I humored her because I loved her, but I never felt comfortable in those rooms full of people who'd inherited their money instead of earning it. That's when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with the name Ashley, my daughter-in-law. I picked it up on the second ring. I expected last-minute nerves. Maybe she needed advice on the flowers. Maybe she just wanted to say thank you for raising the man she was about to marry. "Ed, listen," Ashley said. There was no hello, no greeting. Her voice was tight the way it sounded when she was pitching her interior design ideas to clients she was trying to impress. "I'm here, Ashley," I said. "Is everything okay with Mike?" "Everything's fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. Look, Ed, we've been going over the guest list and the seating charts for tomorrow. We have a situation with the optics. Optics. That was Ashley's favorite word. She was 29 years old, ran a boutique design firm that had never turned a real profit. But she talked about optics as if she were running for governor. What kind of optics? I asked. The conversation that followed would change everything. She sighed, a loud, impatient sound that crackled through the speaker. We have a lot of high-profile guests coming tomorrow, Ed. Senator Martinez is flying in. We have the venture capital guys from Rocky Mountain Partners. These are people who can make or break Mike's future with the company. We're trying to curate a specific image of success and modern elegance. I waited. My hand gripped the edge of the ironing board. The metal felt cold under my fingers. The word curate sat wrong in my gut. Ashley talked like everything in life was a museum exhibit to be arranged for maximum impact. So, Ashley continued, her voice dropping an octave, trying to sound authoritative, we think it's best if you sit this one out. The ceremony, I mean. I froze. The steam from the iron hissed in the silence. For a moment I thought I'd misheard her. I thought maybe the old furnace was making too much noise. Excuse me, I said, my voice low. Don't make this difficult, Ed, Ashley snapped. The fake sweetness was gone now. This was the real Ashley, the one who treated service workers like furniture and sent back perfectly good food at restaurants just to show she could. Look at it from my perspective. You show up in that old suit of yours with your rough hands and your truck. It doesn't fit the narrative. We only want important people at the main event, people who add value to the network. Important people. The words hung in the air like smoke. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused. They were scarred from 39 years of loading crates, fixing engines, and building routes in the dead of winter. They were the hands that had built the empire that was secretly funding her entire lifestyle. They were the hands that had held Margaret as she died, promising her I'd take care of our boy. These hands had signed paychecks for 120 families every Friday for 30 years. These hands had never bounced a check, never missed a payment, never left a debt unpaid. These hands had built something real while Ashley played with fabric samples and talked about brand synergy. I see, I said. My voice was steady, but inside something was breaking. Not breaking like glass breaks, sudden and sharp. Breaking like ice breaks on a lake in spring, slow and inevitable. I'm not an important person. Not in that room. No, Ashley said, sounding relieved that I wasn't yelling. The relief in her voice told me she'd been planning this conversation, rehearsing it. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was calculated cruelty. But hey, she continued, her voice taking on that fake, cheerful tone people use when they're about to offer you garbage and call it gold, we're not banning you completely. You can come to the reception after 10 o'clock. The service entrance around the back will be open. We can get you a plate of food in the kitchen, and you can say hello to Mike when the VIPs leave. It's a win-win. A plate of food in the kitchen. Like I was hired help. Like I was the plumber who'd fixed their pipes and deserved a sandwich for my trouble. The service entrance, the back door, the place where deliveries came and garbage went out. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was the feeling of a heavy door slamming shut and locking forever. It was the sound of respect dying. It was the moment I realized my son had married a woman who saw people as props in her performance of being important. Does Mike know about this? I asked. The question came out steady, but my throat felt like I'd swallowed sand. The silence on the other end lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds that told me everything I needed to know. 4 seconds that revealed the betrayal was complete. My son, the boy I'd taught to throw a curveball, the boy I'd carried on my shoulders at Rocky's games, the boy who'd cried in my arms when his mother died, had agreed to this. He's in the shower right now, Ashley said, her voice dismissive. He's emotional, but he knows what's best for our future. He agrees that we need to prioritize the business connections. Don't call him tonight, Ed. You'll just upset him. Just do the right thing and stay home until 10 tomorrow. She didn't wait for an answer. She hung up. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time. The silence of the house was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock in the living room, the one Margaret had inherited from her mother. Tick, 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 each second marking time in a life that had just changed forever. I looked at the suit hanging on the cabinet, the suit I'd ironed with such care. I reached out and touched the fabric. It was old. It was honest. It had buried my wife and celebrated my son's college graduation. It had been good enough for every important moment in our family's life, but it wasn't good enough for Ashley Rodriguez's performance of success. Ashley Rodriguez thought she was speaking to Ed the retiree. She thought she was speaking to a man who lived on Social Security and coupons. She had no idea she'd just insulted the silent owner of Peak Mountain Logistics LLC, the very entity that was listed as the angel sponsor for her entire wedding. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the iron against the wall. I didn't call my son to beg for my place at his wedding. Instead, I walked over to the cabinet and poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey. It was a cheap brand, the kind that burns on the way down. I'd been drinking it since I was 22 years old, back when it was all I could afford. Now I could buy the distillery, but I still preferred the honest burn of working man's bourbon. I drank it in one swallow. The heat spread through my chest, but it didn't touch the cold that had settled in my heart. 39 years of building a life, 39 years of putting my family first, and this was what it got me. A backdoor invitation to my own son's wedding. Then I picked up my phone again. I scrolled past Mike's name. My thumb hovered over it for a moment. Part of me wanted to call him, wanted to hear him tell me this was all Ashley's idea, that he still wanted his old man walking him down the aisle. But I knew better. Ashley didn't make decisions Mike disagreed with. She made decisions Mike was too weak to oppose. I scrolled past my sister's name in Kansas. I stopped at a contact simply labeled Tim. Timothy Johnson was my lawyer, my fixer, and the only man in Colorado who knew exactly how much money I had and where every cent of it was buried. Tim had been with me since 1995 when I'd needed someone to help me incorporate Patterson Logistics. Back then, he was a hungry young attorney working out of a strip mall office. Now he was senior partner at Johnson, Williams & Associates, but he still took my calls personally. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night, but Tim picked up on the first ring. That's how we'd done business for 27 years, available when it mattered. "Boss," Tim said. His voice was clear, no sleep in it. Tim was probably in his home office, working on some merger or acquisition that would make his firm another $1 million. "Everything good for tomorrow?" "No, Tim," I said. My voice was steady, void of any emotion. Change of plans. I could hear the shift in his tone immediately. Tim had managed my money through Margaret's cancer, through the sale of the company, through the worst moments of my life. He knew when I was angry. He also knew when I was dangerous. "What do you need?" Tim asked, his tone instantly shifting from casual to combat ready. "I need you to execute option 0, I said. The silence on the line lasted 3 seconds. Option 0 was a nuclear code we'd established years ago, back when I first started making real money and needed protection against the kind of people who'd try to take advantage of it. It meant total liquidation. It meant cutting every financial tether I had to a specific target. It meant scorching the earth and salting the ground behind me. "Ed," Tim said cautiously, "option 0 is irreversible. We're talking about Mike's wedding, we're talking about the housing trust, the business investments, everything." Tim knew the whole structure. He'd helped me build it when Mike started dating Ashley 2 years ago. The shell companies, the angel investor persona, the careful separation between Ed Patterson, the retiree, and the financial empire that funded Mike's lifestyle. It had been Tim's idea to create Peak Mountain Logistics LLC as the front company. "Keep your family close," he'd said, "but keep your money closer." I looked at the charcoal gray suit one last time. I thought about Margaret, how she'd squeezed my hand the night before she died and made me promise to take care of Mike. "He's not strong like you, Ed," she'd whispered. "He'll need guidance." I'd promised her I'd always be there for him, but she never said anything about being there for a daughter-in-law who treated me like hired help. "They want important people, Tim," I said. My voice was getting colder with each word. "So let's show them what an important person actually looks like." Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Rodriguez next door walking her little dog. She waved at me like she did every night. Sweet woman, probably didn't make $30,000 a year working at the grocery store checkout. But she had more class in her pinky finger than Ashley had in her entire artificially enhanced body. "Cut it," I said. "Cut it all. I want the credit lines frozen by midnight. I want the venue contract voided. I want the investment capital pulled from Mike's consulting business. I want the apartment lease terminated. I want the car payments stopped. I want everything that connects the name Patterson to their lifestyle severed." The apartment alone is worth $4,000 a month, Tim said. The business loan is $150,000. The wedding deposits are $175,000. Ed, we're talking about nuking $250,000 in active commitments. Good, I said. Maybe when they're sleeping on Nick Thompson's couch, they'll remember who was actually important. Understood, Tim said. I'll start the calls now. The international vendors will take until morning, but I can kill the domestic accounts within 2 hours. It's going to be a bloodbath, Ed. Good, I said again. I hung up the phone. I took the charcoal gray suit off the cabinet knob. I didn't throw it away. I folded it carefully and put it back in the closet, right next to Margaret's dress from our 25th anniversary. I wouldn't be needing it tomorrow. I wasn't going to a wedding. I was going to a war. I went to the refrigerator and made myself a turkey sandwich, extra mustard, no mayo, the way I'd been making them since I was loading trucks. I ate it standing over the sink, looking out at the mountains. The peaks were covered in snow already, beautiful and unforgiving. Tomorrow would be a beautiful day for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. Then I went to bed and slept like a baby. At 6 o'clock the next morning, my eyes snapped open. The sun was just starting to rise over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky the color of fresh blood. 40 miles away at the Broadmoor Resort, the nightmare was just beginning for Ashley Rodriguez and my son. I made a pot of coffee, the strong stuff Margaret used to complain about. Truck driver coffee, she'd called it. I sat at my kitchen table with the morning paper and my iPad. The sports section had a story about the Broncos' chances this season. The business section had an article about supply chain disruptions affecting retail deliveries. I'd seen it all before, lived through every cycle of boom and bust in the logistics world. Then I opened the secure portal of Peak Mountain Logistics LLC. Tim had been busy. The screen showed a series of red notifications, each one a small explosion in Ashley's carefully constructed world. Transaction declined. Broadmoor Catering Services, amount $42,000. Transaction declined. Alpine Floral Designs, amount $18,000. Transaction declined. Rocky Mountain String Quartet, amount $8,500. Account frozen. Peak Mountain Wedding Fund. Status, recall notice sent. Contract termination, Broadmoor Presidential Suite, effective immediately. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot and bitter, the way life should taste when you're about to serve justice. My phone began to ring. It was Ashley. I let it ring. It rang again and again, the sound as desperate as a smoke alarm in a burning house. Then Mike called. Then Ashley again. Then a number I didn't recognize. Probably the hotel manager trying to figure out why his biggest wedding of the year had just imploded. I sat there for an hour watching the missed calls pile up like snow against a drift. I imagined the scene 40 miles south. Ashley would be standing in that $200 per night presidential suite, watching her dreams crumble in real time. The credit card being declined at the front desk, the florists packing up their roses, the chef stopping the prep cooks from slicing the salmon, the string quartet loading their instruments back into their van. They wanted a wedding for important people. But they forgot the most important rule of business that I'd learned loading trucks at 4 a.m. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, especially when you don't even know whose hand it is. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Patterson, this is Maxwell Williams, General Manager at the Broadmoor. We need to speak urgently regarding the Rodriguez-Patterson event. I ignored it. Let them sweat. At 7:30, Tim called. It's done, he said without preamble. Every vendor contract canceled. Every credit line frozen. I've got confirmation from the resort that they've begun eviction proceedings. The apartment management company has been notified of lease termination effective Monday. The car dealership will repossess both vehicles by Tuesday. What about the business loan? I asked. Rocky Mountain Partners received the default notice at 6:45 this morning. Mike's consulting firm officially has zero capital as of right now. The office lease terminates Monday. I've already sent notice to the 3 employees he has on payroll. 3 employees. Mike's grand vision of building a logistics consulting empire had resulted in 3 people who would be unemployed by Monday because he'd married a woman who thought I was garbage. The wedding guests? I asked. Senator Martinez's office called to cancel his RSVP at 7:15. Word travels fast in political circles when there's a financial scandal brewing. The venture capital people won't touch this with a 10-foot pole now. Mike's business reputation is finished. I nodded. In the logistics business, reputation was everything. A man's word was his bond. And if you couldn't trust someone to manage a simple wedding budget, you sure as hell couldn't trust them with a multi-million-dollar supply chain. At 8 o'clock, I finally stood up. I went to the closet, but I didn't reach for a suit. I put on my fishing gear, a faded green vest with pockets for lures, cargo pants stained with oil from years of maintaining my own equipment, and a baseball cap that said Colorado Rockies. I grabbed my keys. Not the keys to some rented limousine, but the keys to my Chevrolet Silverado. I was going to the resort, but not to the back door, and not after 10 o'clock. I was going right to the front entrance, and I was going to look exactly like the nobody they thought I was. Sometimes the best revenge is showing people exactly who they underestimated. The drive through the mountains was smooth. I listened to the classic country station, Hank Williams Jr., singing about a man who worked for a living. The morning air was crisp, and the aspen leaves were just starting to turn gold. It was the kind of morning that reminded you why people moved to Colorado in the first place. When I pulled into the circular driveway of the Broadmoor, the chaos was already visible from the road. There were vendor trucks parked haphazardly, some with their engines running and drivers looking confused. A florist van was backing out of the service entrance, the driver shaking his head. Security guards were waving their arms, trying to direct traffic that wasn't cooperating. And right in the center of the storm, standing on the pristine brick steps in a silk bathrobe that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, was my son Mike. He was screaming at a man in an expensive tuxedo who held a clipboard like it was evidence in a murder trial. Ashley was standing a few feet away, her face buried in her hands. She was wearing designer yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, looking like she'd just rolled out of bed, which, considering it was 8:30 in the morning and her wedding was supposed to start at 2 o'clock, she probably had. I rolled down my window as I idled the truck next to a Tesla Model S. The engine of my old Silverado rumbled loudly, cutting through the morning air like a chainsaw in a library. The sound was honest and loud and completely out of place among the luxury cars scattered around the entrance. Mike spun around when he heard the rumble. His eyes locked onto me, and for a second he looked confused. Then his face went through a whole rainbow of emotions, settling on something between embarrassment and rage. He looked like a man who'd been caught with his pants down and was trying to figure out who to blame. He marched toward my truck, his bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. The silk robe flapped behind him like the wings of an angry bird. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking toward the edge of a cliff, and I was the one who had removed the safety rail. "Dad, what the hell are you doing here?" Mike hissed, grabbing the door handle of my truck like he was trying to keep me from escaping. His voice cracked on the word "Dad," the way it used to when he was 16 and trying to explain why he'd dented my truck. I put the Silverado in park and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet felt heavy, like the moment before thunder. I looked him dead in the eye, this boy I'd raised, this man I'd taught to drive stick shift and throw a curveball and treat people with respect. "I'm not here for the wedding, Mike," I said calmly. My voice was steady as mountain granite. "I'm just here to pick up my refund." Mike's face went white, then red, then white again. "What are you talking about? Ashley told you not to come until later. You're supposed to use the service entrance. You're ruining everything." He gestured wildly at the scene around us, as if my truck was the reason vendor contracts were being canceled and credit cards were being declined. As if my presence was the source of all his problems instead of the solution that had been keeping him afloat for 2 years. "Get out of here, Dad," he said, his voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. "Leave now before the investors see you. Do you have any idea who's supposed to be here today? Do you have any idea how important these people are?" Important people. There was that phrase again, the phrase that had started this whole avalanche. Ashley looked up then. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup smeared. She looked like a raccoon that had been crying in a rainstorm. When she saw me sitting in my truck wearing my fishing vest and baseball cap, her face twisted into something between horror and disgust. "Ed, please!" she sobbed, her voice shaky with desperation. "Just go! Mike is under enormous pressure right now. We don't need this. We don't need you making everything worse." That was the knife between the ribs. Even as she sat in the wreckage of her perfect wedding, Even as the vendors packed up and drove away, even as the most important day of her life crumbled around her feet, she was still more worried about being seen with me than about fixing the disaster. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Mike. He was panting now, his chest heaving like he'd just run a marathon. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. He reached out and shoved my chest with both hands, trying to push me back toward the driver's seat. I didn't move. I'm 62, but I spent 39 years lifting crates and hauling equipment that would put most young men in traction. I stood there like a mountain, solid and unshakable. I told you, Mike, I said, my voice getting quieter as his got louder. I'm not here for the wedding. I'm here to pick something up. Pick what up? Mike screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. We don't have anything for you. We don't have food for you. We don't have a seat for you. We have nothing. You're a distraction. You're an embarrassment. Go catch your fish and leave the business to the adults. The adults. My son was calling me a child while standing barefoot in a bathrobe, begging vendors not to leave. That's when the revolving brass doors of the Broadmoor spun open with dramatic precision. Maxwell Williams stepped out, flanked by two large security guards who looked like they could bench press a Buick. Williams was immaculate in his morning coat and tails, not a single gray hair out of place. He walked toward us with the measured stride of a man who'd handled everything from diplomatic crises to celebrity meltdowns. Mike saw him coming, and his whole demeanor changed instantly. The rage melted away, replaced by desperate hope. He tried to straighten his silk robe, tried to hide his bare feet behind one of the scattered suitcases, tried to resurrect some shred of dignity. He put on his best supplicant smile, the one he'd learned in business school. Max, Mike said, his voice suddenly sweet as honey. Thank God you're here. Look, this man is bothering us. He's trespassing on hotel property. Please have security remove him and his vehicle immediately. Mike pointed at me like I was a piece of litter that had blown onto the pristine grounds. I'm sure we can sort out this billing misunderstanding once we get back inside. There's obviously been some kind of computer error with the payment system. Williams didn't even glance at Mike. He walked past him like he was invisible, like he was a piece of furniture that someone had left out on the curb. He walked straight to my truck and stopped 2 feet from my open window. He looked at my fishing vest with its grease stains and frayed pockets. He looked at my baseball cap and my cargo pants. He looked at every detail of my blue-collar uniform. And then he did something that made Mike's jaw drop so hard I thought it might need medical attention. Williams bowed his head. Not a nod, not a casual acknowledgement. A full, respectful bow from a man who'd spent his career serving foreign dignitaries and Fortune 500 CEOs. I reached into the pocket of my cargo pants and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a single sheet that Tim had prepared the night before, typed on official letterhead with raised seals and legal language that could stop a freight train. It was the formal revocation of sponsorship, the document that legally dissolved the shadow company that had been paying for Mike and Ashley's lifestyle for the past 2 years. I believe this belongs to you, Max, I said, holding out the paper. Williams took it with the reverence of a priest accepting a sacred text. He didn't need to read it. Tim had emailed him a digital copy at 6:30 that morning, along with a complete financial breakdown of the Rodriguez-Patterson account. Williams folded the document neatly and placed it in his inside breast pocket. Then he spoke, and his words cut through the morning air like a sword through silk. "Good morning, Chairman Patterson," Williams said. His voice was clear and professional, carrying the weight of absolute respect. "We have executed your instructions to the letter." The word chairman hung in the Rocky Mountain air like a thunderclap. Mike froze completely, his brain trying to process information that didn't compute. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "What?" Mike whispered, the word barely audible. Williams continued, still addressing only me, still ignoring Mike completely. "The master account has been closed per your directive. All vendor contracts have been terminated. The presidential suite has been vacated. The catering services have been canceled. We have also prepared the itemized receipt for the cancellation fees you requested." "Cancellation fees," I said. "Put them on my personal account. I don't want these two worrying about the bill. They have enough problems." "Of course, sir," Williams replied. "Will there be anything else you require?" Mike was staring at us like we were speaking a foreign language. He looked at Williams, then at me, then back at Williams. His brain was short-circuiting, trying to reconcile the image of Ed Patterson, the blue-collar retiree with the title chairman, and the deference being shown by the general manager of Colorado's most exclusive resort. "Wait," Mike stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Max, why are you calling him that? This is my dad. He drives a truck. He fixes his own gutters. He's nobody." Williams turned slowly to face Mike, and the look on his face was colder than a January morning in the Rockies. It was the look a king might give to a peasant who'd interrupted a royal conversation. "Mr. Patterson," Williams said, his voice dripping with barely contained disdain, "you seem to be under a profound misapprehension about your circumstances." Williams paused, letting the words sink in like ice water. "This resort does not extend $350,000 lines of credit to nobodies. The angel sponsor you've been bragging about for the past 8 months, the mysterious holding company that has financed your lifestyle, your apartment, your cars, your business venture." Williams gestured toward me with one perfectly manicured hand. "Peak Mountain Logistics, LLC, is fully owned and operated by Mr. Edward Patterson. Your father has been the sole source of funding for every aspect of your adult life." The silence that crashed down on the driveway was deafening. You could hear the wind moving through the pine trees, the distant sound of traffic on the highway, the beating of Mike's heart as his world imploded in real time. Ashley's face went from red to white to green, cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. She was staring at me with the expression of someone who'd just realized they'd been insulting the person who controlled their oxygen supply. Mike's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air that wouldn't come. He looked at me sitting in my beat-up Silverado, wearing clothes that had seen better decades, and tried to process the impossible equation his brain was struggling with. The man he'd just called a nobody was apparently the financial puppet master who'd been controlling every aspect of his adult life. "You," Mike whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. His voice was barely audible, like he was afraid that speaking too loudly might make this nightmare real. "You're the investor? You're Peak Mountain Logistics?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the question hang in the crisp mountain air while I studied my son's face. I watched the exact moment when the full magnitude of his situation hit him like a freight train. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the hood of a nearby BMW to keep from falling over. Ashley was standing frozen beside a pile of Louis Vuitton luggage, staring at me with the kind of horror usually reserved for natural disasters or tax audits. Her perfectly applied makeup was running down her cheeks in black streaks, and her designer yoga pants suddenly looked like costume pieces from a play about people pretending to have money they didn't earn. "Dad," Mike said, and his voice cracked. On the word, the way it used to when he was 12 and had broken something expensive. "Dad, wait. This is incredible. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" The transformation was instant and nauseating. The embarrassment vanished from his face, replaced by a desperate, calculating smile that made my stomach turn. This wasn't my son realizing he'd made a terrible mistake. This was a con artist who'd just discovered his mark was sitting right next to him. "This explains everything," Mike babbled, his words tumbling over each other like rocks in an avalanche. "The mysterious angel investor, the perfect terms, the unlimited funding, it was you all along. Dad, this is amazing." He stepped toward my truck, his bare feet slapping against the cold pavement, completely forgetting that he was standing outside one of the most exclusive resorts in America wearing nothing but a silk bathrobe. His hands were shaking with excitement now instead of fear. "Look, about what Ashley said last night," Mike continued, his voice taking on the wheeling tone of a used car salesman trying to close a deal. "That was all a misunderstanding. She didn't know. How could she know? You kept this secret so well. You're like a financial ninja or something." He laughed, a high-pitched sound that echoed off the mountains like the call of a wounded animal. "We can fix this, right? You can call Max back. Tell him to turn the ovens back on, get the vendors to come back. We can spin this whole thing. The mysterious billionaire father reveals himself on his son's wedding day. The press will eat this up. It'll be great publicity for both our companies." Ashley unstuck herself from her frozen position and walked over to stand beside Mike. She'd wiped most of the makeup off her face, and without the artificial enhancement, she looked younger and more desperate. She reached for my hand through the open truck window. "Ed, I'm so sorry," she said. And for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded like she meant it. I had no idea who you really were. If I'd known, I never would have. I mean, the optics thing was just what? I asked quietly. She stopped mid-sentence, realizing there was no good way to finish that thought. There was no explanation that would make "we only want important people" sound reasonable when you were talking to the person who'd been paying your bills for 2 years. It was stress, she said finally. Wedding stress. You know how brides get. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please, Ed. Your family. We can work this out. Family. The word tasted like ashes in my mouth. Family doesn't tell family to use the service entrance. Family doesn't hand out backdoor invitations like they're doing you a favor. Mike grabbed Ashley's hand and squeezed it, a gesture that probably looked romantic to him but looked more like two drowning people trying to drag each other down. Come on, Dad, he said. We're all adults here. Let's go inside and discuss this properly. This presidential suite has an amazing view. We can have champagne, figure out the best way to restart everything. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I searched his face for any sign of genuine remorse, any indication that he understood what he'd done wrong. But all I saw was opportunism. All I saw was a man who'd spent the last 10 minutes calling me an embarrassment and was now trying to figure out how to monetize my forgiveness. You think this is about money? I said finally. Isn't it? Mike asked, confused. I mean, you're upset about the funding, right? About us not appreciating the investor relationship properly? We can fix that. We can set up proper meetings, quarterly reports, whatever you need. I shook my head slowly. He still didn't get it. He thought this was a business dispute that could be resolved with better communication and maybe some profit-sharing agreements. Mike, I said, my voice steady as bedrock, last night your wife told me I wasn't important enough to walk through the front door of your wedding. She told me to use the service entrance and eat in the kitchen with the hired help. And you agreed with her. But I didn't know, Mike started. You didn't know I had money, I finished. That's the point. You were ashamed of me when you thought I was just a blue-collar retiree who drives an old truck. But now that you know I'm rich, suddenly I'm family again. The truth of it hit him like a slap. His face went red, then white, then red again. We were just trying to... You were trying to manage your image, I said. You were worried about what the important people would think if they saw you with a father who looked like he actually worked for a living. I started the engine. The Silverado's rumble cut through his protests like a chainsaw through silk. Please, Dad, Ashley said, and now she was crying real tears instead of the crocodile tears she'd been producing for the hotel manager. Don't do this. We can fix this. We can make it right. You're right, I said, putting the truck in gear. You can fix this. You can get jobs. You can pay your own bills. You can learn what it's like to be unimportant. I looked at them one last time. You said you only wanted important people at your wedding. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. I drove away without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see Mike standing in the circular driveway of the Broadmoor, still wearing that silk bathrobe, still barefoot on the cold pavement, watching his entire world crumble in real time. Ashley was beside him, her designer luggage scattered around her feet like the remnants of a life that had just been canceled. The drive home through the mountains was peaceful. I took the long way, through the winding roads where Margaret and I used to drive on Sunday afternoons. The aspen leaves were golden now, and the air smelled like snow and pine needles. It was the kind of day that reminded you why some things were worth fighting for and others were worth walking away from. When I got home, I poured myself another cup of coffee and called Tim. How do you feel? He asked without preamble. Like I just took out the trash, I said. Good. Because it's about to get worse for them. Much worse. Over the next 10 days, I watched from a distance as my son and his wife learned what it meant to live without a safety net. Tim had been thorough. Every financial thread that connected them to my money had been cut with surgical precision. The apartment was the first domino to fall. The lease was in Peak Mountain Logistics' name, with Mike listed as an authorized resident. When the company dissolved, the lease dissolved with it. They had 72 hours to vacate. I drove past the building on Tuesday morning and saw them loading their belongings into a U-Haul truck that was too small for all their designer furniture. Mike was doing the heavy lifting himself, probably for the first time in his adult life. He was wearing jeans and a Denver Broncos t-shirt, both wrinkled and stained with sweat. Ashley was directing him like a traffic cop, telling him to be careful with the Italian leather sofa and the imported dining set. They looked like children playing house who'd just been told recess was over. The cars went next. The BMW and the Mercedes were both leased through Peak Mountain Logistics' corporate fleet program. The repo men came on Wednesday morning while Mike was at a job interview. By the time he got home, there were 2 empty parking spaces and a note explaining where he could pick up his personal items from the glove compartments. Mike's consulting business died a quick and painful death. Without the $150,000 operating loan from Rocky Mountain Partners, he couldn't make payroll for his 3 employees. The office lease was terminated by Friday. By the following Monday, Mike Patterson Logistics Consulting was nothing more than a dead website and a stack of business cards that nobody would ever call. But the real education came when Mike tried to find a new job. He'd been coasting on his father-in-law's connections and the reputation of his consulting firm for 2 years. Now, stripped of those advantages, he was just another guy with an MBA and no real experience. I knew this because Tim had strategically mentioned Mike's financial irregularities to exactly the right people. Not enough to be liable, just enough to raise questions. In the business world, questions were poison. Nobody wanted to hire someone who might be carrying unknown baggage. Ashley's interior design business collapsed even faster. Her client base had been built on networking at country club events and charity galas, functions she could no longer afford to attend. When word got out that her own wedding had been canceled due to financial problems, her wealthy clients started asking uncomfortable questions about her ability to manage budgets. By the end of the 2nd week, they were living in a studio apartment in Aurora that smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. The rent was $850 a month, which might as well have been $8,500 given their new financial reality. Mike was working at a call center, selling insurance policies to people who hung up on him. Ashley had taken a job at a chain restaurant, serving food to the kind of people she used to look down on. I knew all this because I'd hired a private investigator, not to torment them, but to make sure they were surviving. Despite everything, Mike was still my son. I wasn't going to let him starve, but I wasn't going to rescue him either. The investigators' reports painted a picture of 2 people discovering what the real world looked like when you couldn't buy your way out of problems. Mike had lost 15 pounds from the stress and the physical labor. Ashley had stopped getting her nails done and her hair styled. They looked like different people, smaller somehow, like the artificial inflation had been let out of their lives. But the most telling detail came in the 3rd week. According to the investigator, they'd started fighting, real fights, the kind that involved thrown dishes and slammed doors. The fairy tale marriage was cracking under the pressure of actual adversity. Mike had called me 47 times in those 3 weeks. I counted. He'd left voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading to desperate. In the early ones, he demanded explanations and threatened lawsuits. In the middle ones, he bargained and promised to change. In the recent ones, he just cried. I didn't return any of the calls. Ashley had tried a different approach. She'd shown up at my house twice, both times when Mike was at work. The first time, she'd been angry, demanding that I reinstate their funding and threatening to take me to court. I'd watched her from my kitchen window, pounding on my front door for 20 minutes before giving up. The second time, she'd been broken. She'd sat on my front steps for 3 hours, just crying. Mrs. Rodriguez next door had asked if I wanted her to call the police. I'd told her no. Sometimes people needed to sit with their choices for a while. On this particular Friday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after the wedding that never happened, I was sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee when my phone rang. It wasn't Mike this time. It wasn't Ashley. It was Tim, and his voice had an edge to it that I hadn't heard since Margaret's cancer diagnosis. "Ed," he said, "we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked, setting down my coffee cup. Tim didn't use words like problem lightly. In his vocabulary, a problem was the kind of thing that required lawyers, private investigators, and possibly federal intervention. "Mike and Ashley are planning something," Tim said, "something stupid and desperate. My contact at the courthouse says they filed papers this morning. They're suing you." I almost laughed. "For what? I haven't done anything illegal. Every contract was legitimate. Every cancellation was within the terms of service. They don't have a case. They're not suing for breach of contract," Tim said, and his voice was grim. "They're suing for elder financial abuse." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Elder abuse. They were going to paint me as a senile old man who'd been manipulated into making irrational financial decisions. They were going to claim that cutting off their funding was evidence of diminished mental capacity, that someone with sound judgment would never destroy his own son's wedding. The filing claims you've been showing signs of dementia and paranoid behavior, Tim continued. They're asking the court to appoint a conservator to manage your finances. Guess who they've volunteered for the job? I stood up from my porch chair, pacing to the railing. The mountains looked the same as they had an hour ago, but everything felt different now. They want control of my money. All of it, Tim confirmed. The filing claims you're a danger to yourself and that your recent actions prove you're no longer capable of managing an $85 million estate. They've got a psychiatrist lined up to testify about age-related cognitive decline. They've got financial experts ready to say that destroying a family business relationship shows impaired judgment. I felt a cold fury building in my chest, different from the controlled anger I'd felt 3 weeks ago. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was about Mike and Ashley trying to steal everything I'd worked 39 years to build, using the legal system as their weapon. There's more, Tim said. They've been talking to journalists. Channel 9 is planning a story about elder abuse in wealthy families. They're going to portray you as a confused old man who was tricked into funding their lifestyle and then lashed out when he came to his senses. The brilliant part of their strategy was obvious. They'd flipped the narrative completely. Instead of being the entitled brats who'd insulted their benefactor, they were now the victims of an unstable elderly man who'd used his wealth to manipulate and control them. Instead of being ungrateful parasites, they were now concerned family members trying to protect a vulnerable senior citizen from his own poor decisions. "When's the hearing?" I asked. "Monday morning. Judge Patricia Hendricks. She's tough but fair, doesn't suffer fools. The problem is, Ed, some of what they're saying isn't completely crazy. You did destroy a $250,000 wedding over a phone conversation. You did systematically eliminate every source of income they had. To someone who doesn't know the full story, it could look like the actions of a man who's not thinking clearly." I walked back into the house, my mind racing. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Rodriguez watering her tomatoes. She waved at me, and I waved back automatically. Normal life was continuing all around me while my son was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. "What do we need to do?" I asked. "We need character witnesses," Tim said. "People who can testify that you're mentally sharp, that your decisions were rational responses to genuine disrespect. We need to show the judge that you're not a confused old man, but a businessman who was protecting his interests." I thought about the people in my life. Margaret's sister in Kansas, who I talked to every Sunday. My former employees at Patterson Logistics, who still sent Christmas cards and invited me to retirement parties. The guys at the hardware store who asked my advice about everything from engine repair to business loans. "We'll also need to attack their credibility," Tim continued. "Show the judge who Mike and Ashley really are. The good news is, they've given us plenty of ammunition. Mike's work history shows a pattern of living beyond his means. Ashley's design business was bleeding money even before the wedding fiasco. They were already in financial trouble, which makes their sudden concern for your mental health look suspicious." I made a decision. Set up a meeting. With who? With Mike and Ashley. Before this goes to court. I want to look them in the eye and give them one chance to walk away from this. "Ed, that's not a good idea. Anything you say to them could be used against you in court. If you say something angry, they'll claim it's evidence of your unstable mental state." "I don't care," I said. "This is my son we're talking about. Before I destroy him in court, I want to see if there's anything left of the boy I raised." Tim sighed. "Where do you want to meet?" "Somewhere public would be better, more witnesses to your rational behavior." "No," I said. "My house. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Let them come to me." "Ed, it's not a request, Tim. Set it up." After I hung up, I sat in my living room for a long time, looking at the family photos on the mantel. There was Mike at 8, missing his front teeth, holding up a fish we'd caught at Cherry Creek Reservoir. There was Mike at 16, standing next to the Camaro we'd rebuilt together in the garage. There was Mike at 22, graduating from business school, Margaret and me beaming with pride. When had that boy turned into the man who was now trying to steal everything I'd worked for? When had teaching him to be ambitious turned into teaching him to be greedy? When had showing him how to be successful turned into showing him how to be entitled? Maybe Margaret had been right. Maybe I'd been too generous with him, too protective. Maybe I'd shielded him from consequences for so long that he'd never learned the difference between earning something and being given something. Tomorrow night, I'd find out if there was any part of my son left inside the stranger who was trying to rob me. And if there wasn't, I'd show him what happened when you declared war on a man who'd spent 39 years learning how to fight. They arrived at exactly 7 o'clock the next evening, driving a beat-up Honda Civic that sounded like it was on its last breath. I watched from my kitchen window as they sat in the car for a full 5 minutes, probably rehearsing their performance. Mike was wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit properly, the kind you buy off the rack when you can't afford tailoring. Ashley had on a simple black dress that looked like she'd borrowed it from someone else's closet. When they finally walked up to my front door, they looked like different people from the entitled couple who'd stood in the Broadmoor's driveway 3 weeks ago. The stress had aged them. Mike's face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. Ashley looked brittle, like she might crack if someone spoke too loudly. I opened the door before they could knock. Mike. Ashley. I stepped aside to let them in. Come in. We have things to discuss. They walked into my living room like they were entering a courtroom. Mike sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped in his lap. Ashley perched beside him, her back straight as a board. They both stared at me with the careful attention of people who knew they were walking through a minefield. Tim told you about the lawsuit, Mike said without preamble. His voice was different now, harder. The desperation from 3 weeks ago had been replaced by something colder. We didn't want it to come to this, Dad. But you forced our hand. I forced your hand, I repeated. I walked to my recliner, the one Margaret had bought me for my 50th birthday, and sat down. By cutting off funding for people who told me I wasn't important enough to attend their wedding. That's not what this is about, Ashley said, and her voice had a rehearsed quality. This is about protecting you from yourself. Ed, what you did wasn't rational. Destroying a $250,000 wedding over a misunderstanding? That's not the behavior of a mentally healthy person. I studied their faces, looking for any sign of shame, any recognition of what they'd actually done. I found nothing but calculation. A misunderstanding, I said. Is that what we're calling it now? You're 62 years old, Dad, Mike said. You're isolated, living alone in this house, making impulsive financial decisions that don't make sense. The court will see that. Our lawyer says we have a strong case. Your lawyer, I said. The one you're paying with what money? Mike's face reddened. We'll figure out the fees. This isn't about money. It's always about money with you two, I said. That's the only reason you're here. Not because you're concerned about my mental health. Not because you love me. Because you want control of $85 million. Ashley leaned forward, her eyes bright with artificial concern. Ed, we've been worried about you for months. The way you've been hiding your wealth, living like a hermit, creating fake companies. That's paranoid behavior. That's exactly the kind of thing that shows diminished capacity. The performance was almost believable. They'd practiced this, worked out every detail. Paint the generous father as a paranoid recluse. Paint the secret support as evidence of mental illness. Paint the justified anger as dangerous instability. Here's what's going to happen, Mike said, his voice taking on a business-like tone. The court hearing is Monday. Judge Hendricks will review the evidence and appoint a conservator. We're willing to make sure you're comfortable, Dad. You can stay in the house, keep a reasonable allowance. But the business decisions need to be made by people who understand money. People who understand money, coming from a man who'd never earned a dollar of his own. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I set it on the coffee table between us and pressed play. Ashley's voice filled the room, tinny but clear. We only want important people at the main event, people who add value to the network. Mike's voice followed. Not in that room, no. You can come to the reception after 10 o'clock. The service entrance around the back will be open. Their faces went white as they heard their own words played back to them. The masks slipped, and for a moment I saw real fear in their eyes. That's not legal, Ashley whispered. You can't record people without consent. Colorado is a one-party consent state, I said, and I was party to that conversation. This recording, along with about 20 others I've made over the past 2 years, will be entered as evidence on Monday morning. I pressed another button. Their voices filled the room again, this time from a conversation 6 months ago where Ashley complained about having to invite Ed's blue-collar friends to their engagement party. Then another, where Mike laughed about his father's pathetic little truck in front of their wealthy friends. 2 years of you treating me like hired help, I said. 2 years of you mocking my background while living off my money. 2 years of evidence that you're exactly the kind of people who would try to steal an old man's fortune. Mike stood up abruptly. Dad, stop. We can work this out. We don't have to go to court. Sit down, I said quietly. Something in my voice made him sink back onto the couch. You want to know about diminished capacity? I said. Let me tell you what I've been doing for the past 3 weeks while you've been planning this lawsuit. I've been buying up your debts. Their faces went gray. Ashley's student loans, Mike's credit cards, the personal loans you took out to keep your businesses afloat before you met me, the mortgage your parents co-signed on that house in Lakewood. I own all of it now. I leaned forward in my chair. If you proceed with this lawsuit, I will call in every debt. I will foreclose on your parents' house. I will garnish every paycheck you earn for the next 20 years. I will make sure that your financial problems follow you wherever you go. Ashley started crying, real tears this time. But if you withdraw the lawsuit tomorrow morning and disappear from my life forever, I'll forgive the debts. All of them. You can start over somewhere else, with a clean slate. Mike stared at me, like he was seeing a stranger. You're not the man who raised me. No, I said, standing up. I'm not. The man who raised you was too generous, too trusting, too willing to believe that family loyalty meant something. That man is gone. I walked to the front door and opened it. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to decide. Choose wisely. They left without another word. As I watched their Honda disappear into the night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The next morning, Tim called with the news. The lawsuit had been withdrawn. Mike and Ashley had left Colorado, destination unknown. I never heard from them again. Sometimes the most important thing you can teach someone is that actions have consequences, even if it takes 62 years to learn the lesson yourself.